The Vatican released a new document on papal primacy and ecumenism this week, while the Pope stirred more controversy by using a slur against gay seminarians. Here with analysis of these stories and more is canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, not to mention a member of our papal posse, Father Gerald Murray. Thank you for being with us, Father. I've got to start with this new document coming out of the Vatican. It's called the Bishop of Rome. It deals with papal primacy, that is the role and authority of the Pope, and ecumenical dialogue. Now, it's a study document, and it seems to me it's a meditation on John Paul II's Ut Unum Sint, his encyclical on the papacy and trying to reach out to other churches and the role of the Pope. You've read the document. Why do you think it's being released now?
Well, this document has been in preparation for a number of years because this is part of the ongoing ecumenical dialogue with various Protestant and Orthodox churches. So it's not unexpected that they would come out with a document because the purpose of these studies is to produce a text which then can be further studied and then possible agreements arrived at. So it really is an ongoing process. The question, of course, is what conclusions and what things does the document think significant enough to talk about? And that's where the controversy lies.
Yeah. Well, among other things, the document calls for a clear description of the duties of the Pope with emphasis on his role as Bishop of Rome. There's a further explanation of infallibility, the ongoing need for ecumenical dialogue. Father, is there anything here that strikes you unusual or particularly new here?
Well, what's concerning is the attempt to re-examine the definitions at the First Vatican Council, and then, as it says, a rereading or a re-lecture or a reinterpretation of the Church's teaching regarding the universal jurisdiction of the Pope and possibly also infallibility. These things, of course, are rejected by Protestant and Orthodox churches. They don't believe that the Pope has immediate and universal jurisdiction over all the baptized. And papal infallibility is not embraced by Protestants and Orthodox. So I'm always afraid when Rome says we have to take a look at what's been previously defined and then reread it in the light of subsequent developments, because rereading can be seen as a euphemism all about as a rewriting.
Right.
And that's not what we need.
Father, Pope Francis appears to have gone back to the well of controversy this week. 2 weeks ago, you'll remember he apologized for using a gay slur in front of Italian bishops. Well, this week, on Tuesday, he did it again. He used a derogatory term, the same one, for homosexuality when talking to Roman priests. He allegedly said, and I quote, "There is an air of faggotry in the Vatican," and that gay men should not be admitted to the seminary. Father, the Vatican quickly apologized the first time. What do you make of this second reference? What does it tell us? And isn't it interesting, though, that "who am I to judge" was held up as a type of dogma? What of this?
Well, this is all very stupefying, if I can say that. The Pope uses a very vulgar expression. His spokesman apologizes profusely, said no intent to offend. And then within 2 weeks, the Pope is using the exact same language. I'm not quite sure why the Pope does this. You don't need to use pejorative terms to talk about the problem of homosexuality and candidates for the seminary and the role that seminaries have in screening out people who have a problem with homosexuality. So I know the Pope likes to be provocative, and following the last incident, a number of writers noted that he was famous for using vulgarities, and it was something that is regrettable when it's used in this kind of forum. So I don't know what to say. You think after a spokesman apologized that the apology meant he's not going to do it again, but then that's what happened.
Right. Well, then there's a cleanup going on, which is rather curious. The day after this slur was allegedly uttered, Jesuit Father James Martin rushes in, who has a homosexual ministry. He met with Pope Francis, and in an ex-post, he writes the following. He's kneeling in front of the Pope, and he says, "I was honored to meet with Pope Francis for an hour-long conversation today at Casa Santa Marta. With his permission to share this, the Holy Father said he's known many good, holy, and celibate seminarians and priests with homosexual tendencies. Once again, he confirmed my ministry to LGBTQ people and showed his openness and love to the LGBTQ community." Father James Martin, June 12th. Is this damage controlled by the Pope's unofficial comms director? And again, the Pope seems to be saying two different things here.
Well, this is Father Martin putting the most positive spin from his point of view on now two statements in which the Pope is saying that there's a problem with homosexuality in seminaries and in the Curia. And now he's saying that the Pope, praises those with a homosexual tendency who are, living celibacy, living a good life. The issue here is not the individual person, of course. The issue is the criteria for discerning who can serve as a celibate priest in the Catholic Church. And the Pope said quite clearly, it was in a document he approved early in his pontificate, that those with deep-seated homosexual temptation or tendencies should not be admitted to the seminary. He re-said that again a couple of weeks ago. This is an area where the Pope has to speak with one voice, because Father Martin is basically saying if you have a problem with homosexuality, it's not an obstacle to entering the seminary, and yet the Pope has said just that.
Yeah, it's very confusing to the people at home watching, or to people outside the church trying to make sense of this, which sort of relates to this next story. Pope Francis is receiving a group of comedians from the U.S. on June 14th, Father. This cultural exchange will include Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Fallon, Jim Gaffigan, Whoopi Goldberg, Tig Notaro, Chris Rock, and others. Also on the list is that noted American Jesuit comic, Father James Martin. I don't know why he's on the list, but he's there. Father, the Pope has talked about the power of art and comedy to create a more empathetic and a more sympathetic world. The intention of this meeting is to, quote, celebrate the unity of human diversity, according to the Vatican. Your thoughts on what this is and why meet with these comics, high profile, not only from the United States, around the world?
Well, this strikes me as the kind of like, we're the same as the world. We like comedians, so we're going to have a meeting and show how much we appreciate them. The problem here, of course, is this is a select group. I didn't notice any conservative comedians from the United States like Greg Gutfeld. He wasn't invited. And I'm also wondering, why is it that comedians who are propagandists for abortion were invited? Would they invite comedians who were, issuing gay slurs, for instance? I don't think so. Let's get to the point here. The world of culture draws its inspiration from different sources. The churches say, draw your inspiration from the gospel, from the life of Christ and the saints. We shouldn't be tagging along and saying people who use quite often vulgarities and say things that are very objectionable, that we want to bask in their fame, so we're going to invite them to the Vatican. I don't think that's a good policy.
Well, somebody asked me the other day, why do you think the Pope keeps using this slur in public? I said, well, he's meeting with these comedians. Maybe he's trying out some new edgy material. I don't know. But it seems to me the double talk coming out of the Vatican is laughable enough. We don't need comics advising anybody, but we'll see how all this shakes out and if the Pope gets any, fun jokes or coverage out of this. But an interesting ecumenical story this week, coming just before the release of that Vatican document on ecumenism, the Southern Baptist Convention has voted to oppose IVF, in vitro fertilization. Now, Father, this has long been a sticking point, a point of division between Catholics and Protestants, where, Catholics sort of parted ways with their separated brethren on this issue of IVF. Could this unite the pro-life movement in a way perhaps we haven't seen before?
I think it can, because it's a recognition by the Baptists now that morality has to coordinate with reality. The reality is, once you're conceived, once the sperm and the ovum have been united, and we have that newly conceived human being, that's an independent person. That person is dependent physically for its life on the mother and will grow in the womb. But in vitro fertilization, the Catholic Church has always taught that it's wrong. It's both immoral in what it produces. And then a terrible side effect, of course, is that many children are aborted because not all of the fertilized eggs are then implanted in the mother's womb. So, when Baptists and other serious Protestants, by serious, I mean those who judge by biblical standards and not by the standards of the world, when they see Catholic teaching and now understand its truthfulness and its coherence, that's a positive gain for ecumenism.
Okay, I've got 2 minutes. The G7 summit meets in Italy. Pope Francis is going to become the first pope to participate in these talks. He'll have bilateral meetings with Joe Biden, as well as Zelensky and Macron and others. Francis will also speak on the dangers of artificial intelligence. Father, your thoughts on the Pope's participation in these G7 talks, and what, if any, difference he'll make there?
Well, I think it's good that the Pope addressed world leaders, and doing so as a group, but then individually, it's an opportunity to, call forth the gospel message of truth and obedience to God's law. So I think that's all to the good. Now, the question is, of course, will these people be challenged on the specifically horrible things that they're doing, often trying to justify the name of Christianity? And in the case of President Biden, he's the guy who recently made the sign of the cross at a pro-abortion rally. I hope he gets called out on that, because President Biden continues to maintain the fiction that he's a devout Catholic while supporting abortion. And that really is the human rights issue of our time. So I hope the Pope addresses that question.
He's also meeting, the Pope is, with Trudeau in Canada. I hope he talks about the desecration and destruction of churches, which is an ongoing problem there, and the narrative that created this situation. That all needs to be addressed by Trudeau, and the Pope can help there. Before we run out of time, Pope Francis at his weekly audience asked priests, Father, I mean you, Padre, to keep those homilies short, like under 8 minutes. He says after that time, attention is lost and people fall asleep. Father, did you set your timer for morning mass is my question.
In general, I'm in favor of short sermons. In fact, my mom said that to me, keep the sermon short. So I agree with the Pope. But there are times and places where a good 15, 20-minute sermon does a lot of good. So it's not universal, but, no one ever talked himself out of favor unless they went too long. So knowing limits is not a bad thing.
No, I agree. But Father, it's a little bit like TV. It's not the thing itself, it's who's doing it. If the person doing it, the homilist is intriguing and interesting, you could sit with them for an hour. If they're not, keep it brief. Thank you, Father Jerry, for keeping it brief for us, though you can always go on and exceed your time on this show. For more commentary from Father Murray, you can go to thecatholicthing.org. Father, we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Raymond.
Thank you.